Save America Act has just passed the House and is now moving to the Senate for a vote. And as you might expect, the left and the right are not in agreement over this. It's definitely getting a lot of pushback, with some people comparing it to The Handmaid's Tale and Jim Crow. So what is the Save America Act? I think we should unpack it. So this morning I jumped on X and I saw that Barack Obama had posted something saying, vote no against the Save America Act. And then I scrolled further down on that to see what some of the comments were, and I saw that someone compared it to The Handmaid's Tale. And then as I dove further into this, I saw that comparison show up again and again. Now, I have a confession. I haven't actually watched The Handmaid's Tale yet. I've seen some of the first season, but that's it. So I asked AI to tell me a little bit of a summary about The Handmaid's Tale and what the connection might be here. In The Handmaid's Tale, the U.S. is replaced by a theocratic regime that centralizes power, removes civil liberties, controls women's legal identity and documentation, uses bureaucratic changes to strip rights incrementally. Critics of the Save America Act argue that requiring strict documentary proof of citizenship to vote feels like the first step in a broader pattern of restricting rights through administrative rules. Their fear isn't that the bill creates a dystopia overnight. It's that tightening documentation requirements could disproportionately affect certain groups. Married women who change their names, low-income voters, elderly people, and so on. And that incremental legal changes are how authoritarian systems historically expand power. Now, supporters reject that comparison entirely. They argue the bill is about verifying citizenship for federal elections. Most democracies require ID. Actually, let's dig into that. So I asked Grok to give me a list of the democratic countries that require a voter ID shown at the polling station that proves citizenship. And here's the list that it gave me: Argentina, Belgium, Brazil, Bulgaria, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Croatia, goes on and on. Greece, Hungary, India, Israel, Italy, on and on. Mexico, Peru, Poland, Portugal, Slovakia, Slovenia. And now here are the democratic countries that do not require a voter ID at the polling station that proves citizenship. Now, I think this might be with some nuance, but here's the list: Australia, Canada, Denmark, Finland, Ireland, Japan, so on. Sweden, United States. So Grok's summary is that among approximately 70 to 80 full and flawed democracies, there's roughly about 75 to 80% that require a citizenship proving ID, and only about 20 to 25% that do not require it. So in other words, we're actually in the minority here in not requiring ID. Now that seems pretty straightforward to me, that the United States is very vulnerable to election fraud. But so as not to oversimplify this, let's pull at some of these other threads. Okay, so here we have a recent report on this on MS Now.
Politico reports that the White House will be voting on the Republican SAVE Act this week. That requires voters to show proof of citizenship when registering and an ID when voting. So when a Pew poll last year shows 83% of voters support voter ID, I'm going to ask you why you are opposed to the SAVE Act. What is it about that you say isn't right?
Well, first of all, the SAVE Act is very poorly written. And it requires you to have both a photo ID and proof of citizenship, which basically means a passport, which many Americans don't have, and it's expensive to get. And if you think about, for instance, women who got married and changed their last name, their birth certificate and their ID are not going to have the same name. They would be disqualified under the way the SAVE Act is currently written. And so I think anything that is literally going to make millions of voters be kicked off of the rolls should raise alarm bells for all of us.
Okay, so she said women that have been married and therefore had their names changed will be disqualified, or otherwise would need to get a passport, which is more expensive. Let's look a little further into that. Okay, so we're over here at factcheck.org. Will the SAVE Act prevent married women from registering to vote? The answer: the proposed SAVE Act instructs states to establish a process for people whose legal name doesn't match their birth certificate to provide additional documents. According to the bill, valid forms of documentary proof include a U.S. passport, a real ID, compliant ID that indicates U.S. citizenship, such as an enhanced driver's license, which is available in a few states, a government-issued photo ID, showing the U.S. as the applicant's birthplace, such as a passport card, a U.S. military ID, if shown alongside a military record of service, showing the U.S. as the applicant's birthplace. Applicants may also present other government-issued photo IDs if they are shown alongside a certified birth certificate, blah, blah, blah. Okay, wow, that's actually a lot of options. So I don't know that it's as easy as saying that if their last name was changed, they're disqualified. It actually seems that there's a lot of different ways that you can prove that you're an American citizen.
Hey, sorry to interrupt this video, but just to quickly say, if you want to dive deeper in these topics with me where I don't have to censor myself because of the algorithm in YouTube, head over to Substack and follow me there. That's the space where I can be a little bit freer with my views and my opinions. So if you're interested in that, follow the link in the description and subscribe to my Substack.
A January 7th press release from Roy's office announcing the reintroduction of the bill said millions of illegal aliens remain in our country illegally, and many have been given the opportunity to register to vote in federal elections. The SAVE Act would thwart Democrat efforts to cement one-party rule and strengthening current law that permits only U.S. citizens to vote in federal elections. Now the rebuttal to that. As we've written, experts say voter fraud by non-citizens is rare. Now, let's actually focus on that word right there, rare. Voter fraud by non-citizens is rare. This is a word that I've seen come up again and again and again. So I decided to just ask AI, how many people are in the United States? The United States has approximately 335 million people as of 2025. Of that number, what percentage would be considered rare? As if to say, hypothetically, that this group of people rarely does this thing. In everyday language, rare usually means under 5% of the population, often closer to 1% or less. Statistically, something affecting 5% of 335 million people would be under 16.7 million people. 1% would be about 3.35 million. So if a group rarely does something, you'd typically be talking about a small single-digit percentage of the population. Now, hypothetically speaking, what if each of these were voters in a national election? Would these voters potentially have significant impact on an election? In other words, is it enough to make a difference? Yes. In U.S. national elections, margins are often decided by tens of thousands to a few 100,000 votes across key swing states, not millions. Even a few 100,000 votes in the right states can change the Electoral College outcome. So a block of 3 to 7 million voters would absolutely be large enough to influence and potentially decide a national election. Okay, now while that doesn't deal with exact numbers, it is enough to sort of illustrate the vulnerability. Certainly you can't deny that our elections are vulnerable to fraud. And yet, for some reason, Democrat officials, including Barack Obama, don't want to require voter ID, and Republicans do. Those that are opposing it seem to be using a lot of emotional rhetoric and fear. Ah, yes, fear, a very powerful driver. Those that are opposing the Save America Act seem to be stoking more fear about married women, women in general, minorities, people of color, all just because the act requires proof of citizenship. This is Jeffrey Mead. He did a pretty good summary of exactly this.
We've got to get this done, and we've got to get it done very quickly. The SAVE Act is an abomination. It's Jim Crow 2.0 across the country. We are going to do everything we can to stop it.
Okay, so this is the Democrat leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, and he's lying through his teeth. The SAVE Act is not Jim Crow 2.0. The SAVE Act and Jim Crow are nothing alike. The Jim Crow laws were like state and local statutes that were enforcing racial segregation. On top of that, they would disenfranchise Black Americans through things like poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, and violence. That was truly rooted in white supremacy, and it targeted Black Americans to suppress their voting rights and their civil rights. Now let's compare that to the SAVE Act. It's essentially a modern election security measure focused on providing proof of citizenship to be able to register to vote in the United States. So here are a couple highlights of what the SAVE Act does or requires. It requires voters to provide proof of citizenship, for example, a passport, birth certificate, or certain real ID compliant documents that indicate citizenship. And this needs to be done in person. So when registering to vote or updating voting records, it needs to be done in person and you need your proof of citizenship. It prohibits states from accepting or processing voter registration applications without this proof. It effectively ends or severely limits mail-in registration, online registration, and automatic voter registration like at DMVs unless proof is provided in person. It also requires states to set up alternative processes for other evidence of citizenship if it's needed. And I've been seeing things go back and forth, but I also think it's being added in that it will require voter ID to vote. Like when you go vote, you have to have your ID. This is not discriminating against people based on race. But Chuck Schumer is trying to lie and manipulate people into reacting emotionally to oppose it because he doesn't think it's in Democrats' best interest. And I mean Democrats' political power. Look at this image. What does it say behind him? Rein in ICE, stop violence. Look at the first thing, in the roving patrols. Why do Democrats want to rein in ICE? Because they want less people being deported because it's going to hurt their census numbers when it gets to 2030. It also gives every time someone's deported, that's one less person they can convert from amnesty and have a future voter. So think about it. He wants us not deporting a bunch of illegal immigrants. And then on top of that, he wants our elections less secure. Put those two things together, and what does that make you think? That's interesting, is it not? As a whole, the Democrat Party wants to leave a bunch of illegal aliens in the US and their states, and they want our elections less secure. That's concerning. Chuck Schumer is on stage lying through his teeth, trying to emotionally manipulate people into opposing us having better election integrity. Questionable, is it not?
So that brings us right back to square one, the Handmaid's Tale. So the question becomes, does requiring proof of citizenship mean that you're descending into a theocratic regime? Does requiring proof of citizenship mean bureaucratic changes are stripping rights? See, this story just doesn't hold. There's really only one reason why rhetoric like that holds, and that's the power of storytelling. The Handmaid's Tale, Jim Crow, already have an associated emotional resonance, which is why I think it's incredibly powerful to zoom out and get some perspective around these things. When you see that most democratic nations are already doing this, the question should be, why aren't we? Now, let me say this. It is entirely possible that there's something in the Save America Act that I just didn't see or don't know about. And if that's the case and you do know about it, drop that in the comments and let me know. But from where I'm standing, it just seems like further protecting our elections, which is what I think all Americans should want. Well, if you made it this far, thanks for sticking around. And if you got any value out of this video, can you hit like and subscribe and maybe share this with someone you think might find it interesting? And otherwise, stick around because there's going to be a lot more coming up.